"I'm sorry, Ethan," Professor Blake said, voice echoing across the lecture hall. "But you're just too slow to keep up with the rest of the class." My pen slipped from my hand and clattered onto the linoleum floor. For a moment, nobody moved. 30 pairs of eyes flicked toward me, then darted away. I tried to swallow, but my throat felt as though it had closed. He didn't look sorry. His thin mouth curled up, almost smiling. "You might want to consider another field," he continued, tucking his hands into the pockets of his perfectly pressed slacks. "Research requires quick thinking. You don't have that instinct." A girl near the back, Maria, the only person who'd ever partnered with me on projects, shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Nobody did. I bent to pick up my pen, willing my hands not to shake. I could feel the heat rising at my neck, the cold press of humiliation against my ribs. When I finally straightened, he'd already turned back to the whiteboard, like I was just a footnote he'd corrected and erased. I grew up in a modest house just outside of Des Moines, Iowa. My father, Robert Mitchell, was a high school math teacher who believed that success was measured in efficiency. The fastest to answer, the quickest to finish, the first to cross the line. He used to clap his hands together at the dinner table when I paused too long before replying. "Spit it out, Ethan," he'd say, not unkindly, but with the restless impatience of someone who measured worth in seconds shaved from the clock. My mother, Denise, would murmur, "Let him think, Rob," but even she sometimes sighed when I took my time. I was the kid who took forever to decide which book to borrow from the library, the one who lingered over homework problems, wanting to understand every step instead of just arriving at the answer. My older sister, Claire, was different. She was the star sprinter in track, the one who could finish math worksheets in record time. When she breezed through her college applications, everyone called her sharp as a tack. When I finally got accepted into the University of Illinois, my father hugged me and whispered, "Proud of you, son." But I could feel the unspoken clause, "Don't fall behind." I never felt like I was lazy, just thorough. I liked letting ideas steep in my mind, letting their shapes reveal themselves over time. But in my family, that patience was often mistaken for weakness. In elementary school, I had a teacher named Mrs. Keller, who understood me in a way no one else seemed to. She once stayed after class to help me with long division, never rushing me, never tapping her watch. "You see things other kids miss," she told me as she gathered her bag. "Don't ever lose that." I clung to those words more than I realized, replaying them in my head whenever I felt the pressure to hurry up. But by the time I reached middle school, my father's expectations had begun to chisel into me. When I brought home a report card with all A's except a B+ in science because I'd spent too long perfecting my final project, he looked at me across the kitchen table and said, "You know, Ethan, sometimes you overthink yourself out of success." My mother smoothed the hair back from my forehead and tried to soften the blow. "He just means you're capable of more," she said. But the message was clear. I was never enough as I was. I learned to move faster, but I never felt right about it. It was like putting on shoes a size too small. Eventually, it would hurt to keep walking. When I started college, I thought maybe I'd finally found a place where depth mattered more than speed. My major, biomedical research, was all about precision. Every process demanded rigor and patience. I hoped my temperament would be an advantage. But even in academia, the hunger for fast results thrived. You were supposed to chase grants, publish papers as quickly as possible, deliver findings ahead of schedule. Professor Blake was the epitome of this culture, brilliant, charismatic, and always moving at twice the speed of anyone else. The first day I met him, he swept into the lecture hall in a rush of navy blue suits and high expectations. He didn't look much older than 40, but he carried himself like someone who'd already conquered every room he entered. "Research," he announced, "is about instinct. If you have to think too long, you're already behind." I remember shrinking in my seat, my heart knocking against my ribs. That was the moment I sensed my slow burn approach would be a liability here, too. Still, I tried to keep up. I stayed late in labs, double-checking protocols. When everyone else submitted drafts, I stayed behind to refine mine. I told myself it was worth it to get things right. One night, as I was leaving the lab after midnight, I passed Professor Blake in the hallway. He paused, glancing at the thick stack of notes in my hands. "You know, Mitchell," he said, "sometimes good enough is better than perfect." I nodded, but the words cut deeper than he knew. Outside of school, my relationship with my family was a careful balance of updates and omissions. I'd call my father every Sunday and he'd ask, "So, any big achievements this week?" If I talked about an idea I was developing, he'd say, "Sounds like you're still stuck in the planning phase." My sister, Claire, had a different life altogether. Married young, 2 kids, and a job in marketing. She lived 3 states away, but still somehow managed to call every time I had a milestone. "Have you published anything yet?" she'd ask, her voice warm but edged with curiosity. "Not yet," I'd say. "But I'm getting close." There was always a pause, just long enough to make me feel inadequate. Sometimes I'd think back to the afternoons when I was small, lying on the carpet with my mother while she read me stories. Back then, nobody rushed me to understand every word. Back then, my slowness wasn't a problem. It was just who I was. By junior year, I'd learned to navigate the lab politics, but I never learned to feel comfortable in them. When Professor Blake made snide remarks about students who couldn't keep pace, I'd look down at my hands, willing myself to disappear. One afternoon, after we'd all submitted progress reports on our capstone projects, Blake called me into his office. The space was immaculate, every paper stacked with perfect geometry. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "You're meticulous," he said, tapping a folder with my name on it. "I'll give you that." "Thank you," I whispered. But he went on, his eyes steady and cool. "Meticulousness isn't enough. In this field, you need to be quick, adaptive, instinctual. You're too slow, Ethan. And I'm concerned you won't make it." I think a part of me died right then. I remember walking out into the corridor, the afternoon sun slanting across the tiles, feeling like my body was made of glass. Like everyone could see how easily I could be broken. I called my mom that night, and when she picked up, I tried to keep my voice steady. "Mom," I began, "do you think I'm slow?" She was quiet for a moment. "I think you're deliberate," she said finally. "And that's not a bad thing." But the word deliberate felt like a consolation prize. After that conversation, something hardened inside me. I stopped expecting that I'd ever win Professor Blake's approval. I stopped hoping that one day he'd turn to me and say, "You're exactly what this program needs." Instead, I focused on doing what I'd always done, taking my time, doing it right, even if nobody noticed. And that's how I spent the next year, moving at my own measured pace, while everyone around me sprinted. The day everything finally splintered started as just another Tuesday. I woke early, reviewed my notes for the seminar, and walked across campus under a sky so bright it hurt my eyes. My steps slowed as I reached the door to Lecture Hall B. I knew this was the day we'd be getting feedback on our midterm research proposals. I'd spent weeks refining mine, a study on targeted gene therapies that could take years to implement. I believed it mattered. I believed it was worth doing slowly and well. But as I stepped inside, something felt off. Students clustered in uneasy groups, murmuring to each other, eyes flicking to me and then away. Maria caught my arm as I passed. "Ethan," she whispered, "he's in a mood today." My stomach tightened, but I nodded and took my seat in the second row. Professor Blake stood at the front of the room, a single sheet of paper in his hand. He scanned the rows, his gaze catching mine like a cold wind. "Before we begin," he announced, "I'd like to address a concern about standards." My heart beat faster. I looked around, hoping he meant someone else. But when he lifted the paper, I saw my name at the top. "This," he said, holding it up between 2 fingers as though it were something unpleasant, "is an example of how not to approach research. Long-winded, unfocused, slow." A flush crawled up my neck. My breath came shallow and fast. He let the silence hang. "In this field," he continued, "you cannot afford to spend months agonizing over details that don't matter. You must be decisive, efficient, quick." I felt like my chest might cave in. Maria shifted beside me, but she didn't speak. Nobody did. "Ethan," Blake said, And now he was looking at me with a hollow sort of pity. I've tried to be patient, but your work habits are holding back your peers. This program is competitive. If you can't adapt, you should reconsider whether you belong here. A single laugh, nervous and brittle, broke from the back of the room. My face went hot, then cold. I can improve, I stammered, my voice cracking in the middle. I just need. You've had time, he cut in, his voice perfectly smooth. I'm afraid it isn't personal. It's simply for the best. I tried to hold his gaze, but my vision blurred. I looked down at my hands, willing them to stop trembling. For the rest of the lecture, he carried on as if I didn't exist. My name wasn't called during the attendance check. When he handed back the proposals, mine remained on his desk, ignored. Afterward, I lingered, gathering the courage to approach him. My fingers fumbled over the zipper of my backpack. I waited until the last student left before stepping forward. Professor Blake, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I know I work slowly, but I care about the details. I believe they matter. He didn't look up from the papers he was arranging. That's admirable, he said, but this isn't the place for idealists. Something in me shriveled. I turned and walked out into the empty corridor. My steps echoed off the walls, each one louder than the last. I couldn't remember ever feeling so small. When I got home that night, I lay on my bed, staring at the ceiling until darkness swallowed the room. The next morning, I woke to a single email from Blake. Ethan, after reviewing your progress, I recommend you consider withdrawing from the advanced research track. It will be less stressful for you and more efficient for the department. This isn't personal. It's simply reality. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, trying to find a reply. I typed 3 different responses, all polite, all pleading. Then I deleted them one by one. I didn't reply at all. I skipped class that day. For hours, I walked aimlessly across campus, past buildings where other students sat in lecture halls and labs, where they fit in, where they moved fast enough. At one point, I stopped by the little pond behind the science building. I stood there, watching the ripples spreading outward from a single leaf drifting across the surface. I thought about quitting, about packing up my things and going home to Iowa, about telling my father he'd been right all along, that maybe I wasn't cut out for this. But somewhere beneath the shame and the grief, a tiny ember of anger began to glow. You've had time. This isn't personal. It's simply reality. The words repeated in my mind until they no longer sounded true. Maybe he was wrong. Maybe there was more than one way to succeed. For the next few days, I stayed invisible. I didn't raise my hand. I didn't volunteer answers. I slipped in late and left early. Nobody seemed to notice I'd withdrawn. Or if they did, they were too relieved to say so. On Friday afternoon, I got a text from Maria. Hey, just checking in. Are you okay? I stared at the screen for a long time before typing back. Not really, but thanks for asking. She didn't reply. The following Monday, I stood outside the lab for a full 10 minutes, trying to summon the will to walk in. I pressed my palm to the cold glass of the door, remembering how I'd felt when I first arrived here, full of hope that my careful, measured approach would finally be an asset. Now, all I could think about was how easily Professor Blake had decided I didn't belong. Maybe he was right. Maybe this place, this entire world, was built for people who moved faster than I ever could. I took a step back, feeling the decision settle into my bones. For the first time, I let myself consider a different future. One where I didn't spend my life trying to keep pace with people who would never respect the way I worked. As I walked away from the lab, I felt something shift. I didn't know yet that this was the beginning of everything changing. I only knew that I was done trying to prove my worth to someone who'd already decided I didn't have any. I didn't make any grand announcements when I decided to step back. No dramatic emails, no confrontations. Just a quiet, steady extraction of my energy from places where it had never been valued. I stopped showing up for Professor Blake's optional seminars. At first, I worried someone might call me out, but nobody did. The only acknowledgement was an automated email noting my absence, signed with a curt, Department of Biomedical Research. I stopped volunteering for the late-night lab shifts where I used to linger, triple-checking data entries that never made it into the final reports. I deleted the sign-up link from my bookmarks without a second thought. One afternoon, Maria caught me as I was leaving the student center. She looked worried, her backpack slung low on one shoulder. "You're really not coming back to the research group?" she asked. I lifted my eyes to hers and tried to find something reassuring to say. But I was too tired for explanations. "I think I'm done trying to impress people who don't care," I said. Her face softened, and for a second, I thought she might hug me. But she only nodded. "If you change your mind, just let me know." "I won't," I said quietly. It was the first time I'd said it out loud, and it felt like breathing after being underwater for too long. Over the next week, I started pulling back in other ways. I canceled the automatic payment I'd set up to help fund the graduate research fundraiser. I stopped attending the monthly departmental mixers where everyone milled around with cheap wine, pretending they weren't constantly comparing resumes. I stopped checking my university email every hour, desperate for scraps of approval that never came. Instead, I spent my evenings in the small public library off campus, tucked into a corner by the windows. I read journals that had nothing to do with my coursework, studies on cognitive processing and learning styles, essays on the value of deliberate thinking in an accelerating world. The more I read, the more I realized I wasn't broken. I wasn't defective. I was simply built differently. And for the first time, that didn't feel like something to apologize for. One Wednesday afternoon, I walked past the lab just as Professor Blake was holding a meeting. Through the glass wall, I could see the other students gathered around him, scribbling notes, nodding eagerly. For a moment, I felt the old pang, the longing to be included, to be seen. But it faded as quickly as it came. Instead of going in, I kept walking. That night, I went through my computer and sorted every file I'd accumulated over the past 3 years. Drafts of proposals, research logs, project notes, all carefully labeled, all meticulously organized. I didn't delete any of it. I just moved it into a folder called Not For Them. I didn't post about it. I didn't call my parents to explain. I didn't try to justify myself to anyone. For the first time in my life, I let my silence stand on its own. A week later, my father called. He asked why I hadn't mentioned the midterm proposal results. "I heard from Claire that you're stepping back," he said cautiously. I pressed the phone to my ear, feeling strangely calm. I told him. He waited for me to elaborate. When I didn't, he sighed. "Well, I hope you know what you're doing." "So, do I." That was the end of the conversation. It wasn't a dramatic break. Just a clean, quiet space opening up between what everyone expected of me and what I was finally willing to give. I started working part-time at the library where I'd been spending so much time. The director, Mrs. Collins, was a soft-spoken woman in her 60s who never rushed me. On my first day, she showed me the catalog system and said, "Take your time. Accuracy is more important than speed." I nearly cried. Most evenings, I stayed after closing to read in the hush of the empty aisles. I felt more useful, more at peace than I ever had in the lab. I didn't tell many people I'd taken the job. It felt like something precious, a secret I didn't owe to anyone's judgment. Over the next month, the emails from Professor Blake slowed to a trickle. Eventually, they stopped altogether. I realized that all the effort I'd poured into trying to belong hadn't left much for anything else. And once I stopped expending it on people who didn't value me, there was a surplus of energy I didn't recognize. It felt like freedom. One afternoon, Maria sent me a photo of the lab whiteboard, covered in deadlines. "Chaos here. Hope you're doing okay." I stared at it for a while, then typed back. "Better than okay." She didn't reply right away, but when she did, it was just one line. "Good." The weeks turned into months. Spring arrived, and with it, a sense that I'd finally stepped into a life that belonged to me. I wasn't moving fast anymore, but every step felt deliberate. True. And I knew, deep down, that I was never going back. About 2 months after I'd withdrawn from the program, I was shelving a new shipment of medical journals at the library when a man I'd never seen before approached the counter. He was older, with a soft voice and the kind of gentle presence that made you want to lean in just to hear him speak. "Excuse me," he said, glancing at my name tag. "Ethan? Ethan Mitchell?" I hesitated, caught off guard. "Yes, that's me." He offered a hand. "Dr. Alan Perez. I'm a research director at St. Anne's Medical Institute." I blinked. I've read some of your publications." He smiled, and something in me relaxed. "I'm in town for the week, meeting with some colleagues at the university," he explained. "I happened to see your name on the acknowledgement page of a grant proposal Professor Blake submitted a few months ago." My heart stuttered. I didn't know he included me. Dr. Perez tilted his head. "Well, he did. Your section on protocol design was the most thorough I've seen in years. That's why I asked around. I wanted to meet the person who wrote it." For a moment, I couldn't speak. Nobody had ever singled out my work as the best part of anything. "I'm flattered," I managed. He leaned his elbows on the counter, lowering his voice. "I understand you're no longer part of the advanced research group?" I hesitated again. Was this some kind of test? "I'm not," I said finally. It wasn't a good fit. His eyes didn't flicker with judgment. Instead, he nodded like he understood something important. "I hear that more often than you'd think," he said. "Academic culture sometimes mistakes speed for competence." A quiet heat crept up my throat. That was exactly what I'd always felt, but nobody had ever named it so plainly. Dr. Perez continued, "I'm assembling a team to consult on a multi-phase study of gene therapy applications. We need someone detail-oriented, someone who doesn't rush." I swallowed. "Are you offering me a job?" His smile widened. "A consultancy contract at first. We'd need you to review protocols and identify potential inconsistencies. It's meticulous work, not glamorous, but it's essential." It felt like my brain was short-circuiting. I had spent months believing my approach had no place in research. Now here was someone telling me it was exactly what he needed. "I don't have my doctorate yet," I said, suddenly self-conscious. "That's not an obstacle," Dr. Perez replied calmly. "Good science depends on good process. And process can be taught, but attention to detail is harder to find." A tightness in my chest began to ease, replaced by something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. He handed me a business card. "Think about it. No pressure." I turned it over in my fingers long after he left, studying the embossed lettering like it might disappear if I blinked. That night, I lay awake, replaying every word he'd said. Someone who doesn't rush. I thought about calling my mother, but for once, I wanted to keep the moment to myself. The next morning, I emailed Dr. Perez. "Thank you for taking the time to speak with me. I'd love to learn more about the consulting role." He replied within the hour. "Wonderful. Let's set up a time to discuss next steps." I sat staring at the screen, letting the reality sink in. Not long after, Maria texted me out of the blue. "Just heard from a visiting researcher. He asked about you. Said you made quite an impression." I stared at her message, a smile tugging at my mouth. "Yeah, I think things are changing." "About time," she replied. For the first time since leaving the program, I walked onto campus without feeling like I needed to hide. The meeting with Dr. Perez was scheduled for the following week. When I arrived at the small conference room in the University Medical Center, he greeted me with that same kind expression. "I'm glad you came," he said. We spent over an hour discussing the project. As he outlined the scope, I felt my apprehension slowly replaced by a cautious excitement. The work was exactly what I'd always wanted to do, detail-oriented, precise, impactful. Before I left, he stood and extended his hand. "I'll have our coordinator send you the official paperwork," he said. "And Ethan, I meant what I said. Your approach is a strength." I swallowed hard. "Thank you." When I stepped back into the hallway, I felt lighter than I had in years. A few days later, the contract arrived in my inbox. I read every word carefully, savoring the irony that my so-called slowness was now an asset. I didn't tell Professor Blake. I didn't need to. Instead, I sent a short note to Maria. "Just sign the contract. Starting next month." Her reply was immediate. "I'm so proud of you. Sitting there in my little apartment, I let myself feel proud, too. And for the first time, I knew I hadn't been wrong about myself after all. It didn't take long for word of my new consulting role to spread. The biomedical research community was smaller than I'd realized, and apparently Professor Blake paid closer attention to his former students than he let on. A week after I signed the contract with Dr. Perez, I was shelving books at the library when I saw Blake's name flash across my phone screen. For a moment, I thought it was a mistake. But when I picked up, his familiar clipped tone poured through the line. "Ethan," he began, as though nothing had ever happened. "I hear you've started consulting for St. Anne's." I swallowed, gripping the edge of the counter to keep my hand steady. "I have." "That's excellent," he said, though his voice betrayed a faint strain. "They're an impressive institution." I didn't say anything. Letting the silence do the work felt strangely satisfying. After a beat, he continued, "I wonder if you'd have time to come in and discuss your experience. It might be useful for our current students." The nerve of it made my chest tighten. After telling me I was too slow, he now wanted to showcase my success. "I don't think that would be appropriate," I said quietly. He hesitated. "Ethan, I hope there's no lingering resentment. Academia is competitive. Sometimes things are said in the interest of pushing students to improve." I thought of all the nights I'd lain awake, questioning whether I belonged anywhere. Of the way he'd held up my proposal like it was evidence of my inadequacy. "I understand," I replied, my voice calm. "But I'm not interested in rehashing that." There was another pause. "Well," he said finally, "if you change your mind, my door is open." I ended the call, without promising anything. 2 days later, Maria forwarded me an email that had circulated through the department. "We're proud to share that former research associate Ethan Mitchell is now consulting with St. Anne's Medical Institute. His dedication to precise methodology reflects the rigorous standards of our program." I read it 3 times, feeling a surreal combination of vindication and disgust. When I got home that night, I called my mom. "He's trying to take credit," I told her, pacing the small kitchen. "He can't," she said gently. "Anyone who knows you knows how hard you worked on your own." I wished I could believe that was enough. A week later, I received an official letter from the department inviting me to participate in a panel discussion about innovative research practices. The tone was cordial, almost fawning. I didn't respond right away. Part of me wanted to march into that lecture hall and tell every student exactly what it felt like to be humiliated by someone who thought your worth was measured in how quickly you could spit out an answer. But the thought exhausted me. Instead, I drafted a simple reply. "Thank you for the invitation. I'm unable to participate. Wishing you all the best." I hovered over the send button for a long moment before clicking it. The next day, Maria texted me. "He's telling people you're too busy because you're in high demand." "Maybe I am," I wrote back. The idea made me smile. About a month into my new consultancy, Dr. Perez invited me to a team dinner. We met at a small Italian restaurant downtown, the kind of place where the lights were warm and low, and the tables were crowded with conversation. Halfway through the evening, he leaned over and said, "I hear your old program is trying to claim some of the credit for bringing you on board." I looked at him, surprised. He shrugged, his expression kind. "It's not uncommon, but you don't owe them anything." Something unknotted in my chest. "I know," I said. "That's good," he replied, "because I've seen the way you work. You earned this on your own." That night, as I walked home under the spring stars, I thought about all the times I'd tried to make myself smaller to fit into places that were never meant for me. I didn't feel small anymore. But the department wasn't done yet. In late April, I received another email, this one from Blake himself. "Ethan, we'd like to formally recognize your contributions at our end-of-semester awards ceremony. Your success reflects well on the program. Would you consider attending?" I stared at the message, my thumb hovering over the reply icon. Recognition, after all the condescension and dismissal, felt hollow. I thought about it for a day before typing a short response. "Thank you for thinking of me. I prefer to decline. I didn't owe them my presence. Or my gratitude." Maria texted again after she heard. "You're braver than I am." Not brave, I replied. Just tired of pretending. That was the truth. As May slipped into early summer, I stopped wondering whether I'd made the right choice. I knew I had. One morning, I received a call from an editor at a major medical journal. She'd read one of my process analyses, the same one Blake had once called unfocused. She asked if I'd be interested in expanding it into a full article. I nearly dropped the phone. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table, looking around my small apartment. It wasn't much, not compared to the polished labs and imposing offices I'd left behind. But it was mine.
And it was enough.
It was a quiet Sunday morning when I received the message that changed everything. I'd been up early, sipping coffee on my fire escape, watching the city stretch itself awake. My phone buzzed. It was a name I didn't recognize, Lucia Perez. Hi, Ethan, this might be strange, but I'm Dr. Alan Perez's daughter. He asked me to pass something along to you. Said it needed a personal touch. I blinked, confused, and replied, Of course.
What is it?
She sent a voice memo. My hands shook slightly as I tapped play. Alan's voice came through, warm and steady. Ethan, I wanted to leave you this instead of just another email. You've become an invaluable part of our team, and I want you to understand why that matters. A few months ago, my mother, Lucia's grandmother, was in hospice care. One night, while reviewing her file, I came across a small note from the attending nurse. The note described how a medical student had stayed past his volunteer shift to explain her new medication, slowly, clearly, without rushing. My mother, who rarely remembered anyone, remembered you. She told me. There was a young man who didn't mind waiting for me to understand. He made me feel smart again. That young man was you. I didn't know it until later, but when I saw your name on that protocol submission, something clicked. Your work ethic, your patience, it's rare. And it isn't just useful in a lab. It makes people feel human.
Seen. Worthy.
You didn't just save a protocol from collapsing. You reminded a dying woman she still mattered. I thought you should know. The recording ended. I sat frozen. My breath caught somewhere between a gasp and a sob. I hadn't remembered her name. That moment, that night in the hospice center, had been just another shift in a long string of quiet acts. I hadn't done it for praise or credit. I just wanted her to feel safe. And now, months later, it had all come full circle. I messaged Lucia. Thank you. That means more than I can say. She replied almost instantly. He says you changed how he interviews now.
Slower. Kinder.
Thought you'd appreciate that.
I did.
The next time I saw Dr. Perez, it was at the research lab just before our weekly project review. He greeted me with his usual nod, but there was something softer in his eyes. I hope you got the message, he said. I nodded. I did. Thank you. He didn't push the conversation. He just offered a quiet smile and turned back to his notes. But something had shifted. Later that week, I found myself looking back through the patient care journal I used to keep during my clinical rounds, not out of nostalgia, but reverence. I remembered each entry. Notes on elderly patients who needed extra time, children who asked the same question 3 times before it clicked, families who just needed someone to sit and listen. I had always been that person, the one who stayed late, who didn't mind the repetition, who refused to rush what mattered. And for years, I thought it made me weak. Now I understood. It made me different. And sometimes, different is what the world needs most. I began incorporating more of that mindset into the consultancy. I proposed changes to our workflow, not to slow it down, but to deepen it. Instead of pushing staff to finish reviews in under 2 hours, I suggested we build in time for multi-layered quality checks. Instead of demanding immediate turnaround on complex protocols, I helped develop a flexible timeline model that rewarded clarity over speed. At first, there was resistance. But then something amazing happened. The error rate dropped. Patient feedback improved. One day, during a video meeting with our extended team, a new researcher fresh out of med school stayed behind after everyone else logged off. Hey, she said shyly, I just wanted to say, I've been following your notes and methods. I used to think I was too slow to succeed in this field. Watching how you work, it's changed how I see myself. Tears prickled behind my eyes. I nodded slowly.
Thank you, I said.
That means more than you know. And it did. Every thank you, every email, every moment of recognition. It wasn't just validation. It was healing. Healing from years of being told I was the problem. Healing from the silence that had once been a cage, now transformed into peace. One evening, I received a package at my door. No return address. Inside was a framed photo of a whiteboard from the hospice room where I'd met Dr. Perez's mother. In the corner, written in shaky handwriting, were the words, "The kind one with the glasses." He made me feel like my mind still mattered. Below it, a handwritten note. "We saved this. Thought you should have it. LP." I placed the photo on my desk, next to my research notes. A reminder. A blessing. A full circle. It had been nearly a year since I walked out of that lecture hall with my head down and my heart fractured. Since then, life had shifted in ways I never imagined. I had work that fulfilled me, mentors who respected me, and a quiet, rooted confidence that came not from approval, but from alignment. But the past wasn't quite finished with me. It started with an email. Subject: "Let's reconnect. We owe you a conversation." It was from Professor Blake. For a long moment, I just stared at it. Then I clicked it open, more out of curiosity than anything else. "Ethan, I've been reflecting on the past few semesters, and I'd really appreciate the chance to reconnect. There's a new project launching, and I believe your insight could be invaluable. Would you be open to a meeting? Just an informal conversation. Let me know what works for you. Best, Blake." No apology. No mention of the words "too slow," or the embarrassment he'd caused, or the months of silence that followed. I closed the email without replying. That weekend, I drove out to a quiet coastal town a few hours north. I'd been meaning to take the trip for months. The air smelled like salt and pine, and the sea moved with the kind of rhythm that doesn't care if you keep up. On the second morning, I sat at a cafe near the water with my journal open, the sun warming the back of my neck. I thought about the email, about all the versions of me that would have jumped at the opportunity to be invited back. But I wasn't that person anymore. I'd spent so long waiting to be seen, to be asked, to be wanted. Now that the invitation had come, I realized I no longer needed it. When I got home, there was a voicemail waiting on my phone. The voice was familiar, departmental coordinator. Warm but transactional. "Hey, Ethan, just circling back on Blake's email. We're finalizing the speaker list for the symposium next month. Still hoping you'll consider participating. Let us know by Friday." I deleted the voicemail without listening to the rest. The next morning, I drafted my reply.
Hi.
I appreciate the invitation. At this time, I'm not interested in reconnecting. Wishing you the best. Ethan. No emotion. No anger. Just peace. I didn't expect a response. But I got one, barely 3 sentences long. Understood. Should you change your mind, the door remains open. I stared at the screen for a moment and smiled. That door was never mine to walk through, I thought. And I don't need it anymore. A week later, I ran into Maria at a bookstore downtown. She looked genuinely surprised to see me, then lit up. "Ethan, I've been hearing your name all over the place lately. Are you really heading up that patient-first protocol redesign?" I nodded, laughing. "That's me." She hesitated. "You know Blake's been telling people he mentored you, right?" "Let him," I said, without flinching. "The people who matter know the truth." Maria studied me for a moment. "You've changed." I stopped chasing things that don't feed me.
She grinned. "Good."
About damn time. We grabbed coffee and caught up. There were no hard feelings, just two people who once shared a chapter, now living in separate books. As we parted, she turned back and said, "For what it's worth, I always knew you were different. In the good way." And this time I believed it. Later that week, I received a final email from the university, a blanket message to all alumni. It included a line that might have once stung. "Thank you for being part of our legacy." I smiled and closed the message. "No," I thought. "You're part of mine." It's strange how a single sentence can follow you for years. "You're too slow." For so long, I let those words define me. I let them build a wall around my heart, brick by brick, until I couldn't see past the judgment. I believed if I just tried harder, moved faster, I'd finally be enough. But the truth is, the problem was never my pace. It was the expectation that I should abandon the way I was built just to satisfy someone else's timeline. If you've ever been made to feel small for the way you move through the world, I want you to hear this. You are not defective. You are not behind. You are not too much or too little. You are simply you. And sometimes, the people who can't appreciate that are the ones who are stuck, trapped in a narrow version of success that leaves no room for humanity. I wish I could tell you that realizing this made everything easy, that I never doubted myself again. But growth isn't linear. Even after I walked away from the lab, there were nights when I lay awake, wondering if I'd just proven them right by quitting. It took time and distance to understand that stepping back wasn't weakness. It was wisdom. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is choose not to show up where you're tolerated instead of celebrated. When you stop performing for an audience that doesn't value you, something incredible happens. You find the people who do. People like Dr. Perez, who saw the worth in my thoroughness. People like Maria, who always knew I was different in the best way. People who didn't need me to rush or contort myself into someone else's mold. If you're still in the thick of it, still waiting for someone to validate your worth, I hope you'll consider this an invitation to stop waiting. You don't have to prove your humanity. You don't have to outrun your own nature to be worthy of respect. The world will try to convince you that you're only as good as your output, your productivity, your speed. But that's a lie. You are valuable because you exist. Because you care enough to do things fully, not just quickly. Because your kindness isn't measured in efficiency. There's a line I wrote in my journal the day I turned down that final invitation to return. I am no longer a participant in spaces that require me to diminish myself to belong. If that resonates with you, if it makes something loosen in your chest, hold on to it. You deserve to take up space exactly as you are. You deserve to be seen without having to perform. You deserve to say no without guilt. I'm not here to tell you it will be easy. Some people will never understand your choice to walk away. Some will call it weakness. Others will try to spin your story into something that flatters them. Let them. Their perception is not your responsibility. Your peace is. So if you need someone to give you permission to stop proving, here it is. You don't have to hustle for your humanity. You don't have to run to be worthy. You are not too slow. You are just too real for people who pretend. And the life you're meant to live, the one that feels honest, peaceful, and true, is waiting for you on the other side of that final no. Walk toward it. Even if it feels unfamiliar. Even if you're afraid. Because you are not alone. I'm walking there too. And from here, I can promise you, the view is worth it.